Welcome to Adventuring for Knowledge. This is Adventure Call number 1.
Guess what? This is Adventure Call number 2.
And what comes after 2, Manny?
Is it 3?
Yep, you got it. It's Adventure Call number 3.
Last call. Welcome to our podcast.
It's adventure time.
All right, and we're live, ladies and gentlemen.
So who do we have here today, Mr. Manny?
We have Mr. Tom Dakin. He works for the Ocean Airways Canada. He's a friend of mine. Can I call you my friend?
Yeah, certainly. You've earned it.
And I'll give a quick intro on Tom. Tom is an experienced ocean scientist, a pioneer, and a researcher in oceanographic sensors, right? Mm-hmm. He currently works at Ocean Airways Canada as the Marine Acoustics Program Manager. He was the R&D manager for AML Oceanographic for 17 years. Was an officer in the Canadian Navy and the Canadian Armed Forces and the Air Force. Tom has a passion for the sea in its entirety, striving to bring its processes and marine life into view. He has developed a wide range of sensor technologies, including sound speed sensors, CTDs, flow sensors, hydrocarbon detectors, and geothermal heat probe, an underwater mass spectrometer, and towed array sensor for commercial, scientific, and military applications. Recently, Tom has been focusing on underwater sound and noise on the BC coast. I worked with Tom for my capstone project a couple of years ago, and we developed a streamline mount for a hydrophone sensor, which was a really exciting educational endeavor for myself, and I learned
useful
a lot.
to us too.
And you taught me so much about a lot of things, and I think that people who are listening to this episode in specific can learn a lot from you. Let's give it a go.
Before we get into it, we would like to ask Tom a little bit about yourself. Mm-hmm. How old are you, and where'd you grow up, and where'd you go to high school, and build from there?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm 57, just a couple days ago. And
happy birthday.
Thanks. And where did I grow up? I was in the Niagara Peninsula, so in Ontario, farmland. Grew up on a small farm. To answer the question about high school, I went to a school called E.L. Crosley, which is in Fawn Hill. And then from there I went to Royal Roads Military College. Did my undergrad there in physics and physical oceanography. And I did my PhD at UVic in Earth and Ocean Sciences.
What brought you to the West Coast?
The military. So when I was in grade 6, I wanted to be a marine biologist. And so I started right then working my way towards that. But I found as I went through high school and in university as well, I found I was a much better scientist and a much better physicist rather than biologist, and a much better engineer. So I sort of branched into the physics side of things. Yeah. And so that led me to the Navy, which took me to Royal Roads, and so that's how I wound up out here. And
that's awesome.
It was really cool because when I got to this coast and I got to Royal Roads, the first thing I did when I had any spare time was run down to the ocean, because I'd never seen it before.
Really?
And scoop up a handful and taste it.
Really?
Of
the water?
Yeah. Holy crap, was it? I knew it was going to be salty, but I didn't realize it was going to be that salty.
So that must be passion right there.
Oh, yeah. No, ocean's always been an important thing for me. I think it's an important thing for the globe and all of us, and so that's I think partly why I migrated.
So you said you wanted to be a marine biologist since grade 6, right?
Yeah.
Was there any specific event in your life that triggered this want or this passion?
I would say my grandfather got me a book from Jacques Cousteau. In fact, he actually took me to the Welland Canal when the Calypso went through the Welland Canal, and I got to wave to Jacques Cousteau, and he waved back to me when I was a little kid.
Who's Jacques Cousteau? I'm not familiar.
Jacques Cousteau quite a few years ago, he was the oceanographer in the world as far as the lay people were concerned.
He's a legend.
Yeah. So he's a French guy, and he had a show that I can't remember the name of it now, but it was basically, he had a whole bunch of TV programs, kind of like National Geographic stuff, and he would show the ocean to the world. In fact, he was the guy that invented the aqualung. So very, very important figure in oceanography.
So you got to see him and you got to wave to him, and that just engraved in your soul.
Yeah, and I've met his son a few times too. So yeah,
That's awesome.
Cool. Lit that fire to go that direction.
Yeah, it was him and a guy called Don Walsh, and his French colleague Pierre. I can't remember his last name. That's really embarrassing. But those two guys were the first two to ever go down to the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean, in a submersible called the Trieste 2. And so Don Walsh has always been those two gents have always been a sort of heroes of mine. And I got an opportunity to meet him, and I thoroughly embarrassed myself. Because it was at a conference. And so there's Don Walsh, and I'm going, holy, is that like the Don Walsh? And sure enough, it was. So after he finished his presentation, I went running around down the hall trying to find him. And there he was walking down the hallway in this big conference. And I come running up to him and I grab his hand, and I'm shaking his hand. And it's so nice to meet you. And the poor guy, he's looking at me like I'm just assaulting him.
Yeah. How old were you at the time?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I must have been pushing 30. Making a fool of myself.
So this grown man approaching another grown man having a fanboy moment.
And he's not that tall a guy, right? So I'm looking down on it. It must have been pretty awkward for him. But so anyway, I told him he was a hero of mine, and then it was funny because it happened sort of the same time as the lunar landings, right? So they got all the attention, and the deep ocean stuff didn't. And he said, I didn't even realize anybody even remembered that trip. And yet, like, there's been a dozen guys up on the moon, and there's been 3 now, if you include James Cameron, that have been down Mariana Trench. So it puts it in perspective.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. That's wild.
Yeah.
It's a boundary that humans have been trying to push.
How deep is the Mariana?
11 kilometers.
11 kilometers.
Yeah, it's deep.
Pressure must be.
Do you know the pressure?
Yeah, it runs about 11,000 decibars, a little over that, or about 16,000 psi for the people in.
And back in
States.
the day, the technology of the materials and to get down there.
They went down in a sphere,
Yeah.
really tiny, and the French guy was taller than me, and cramming him into that sphere must have been difficult. And then they had a big gas-filled, like gasoline type gas, not air, balloon above it, and so it looked like a submarine, but it was really just a big cylinder full of gas, and that was the buoyancy. So they had a whole bunch of weights, and they sunk down, and then they dropped the weights and came back up.
Wow.
So and they, first people down there, they were seeing sharks and seeing crabs and stuff down there. So pretty in a place where we thought there was nothing, right?
Yeah, right. It's incredible how life
is everywhere.
Is everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere.
Like deep in the crust of it's astounding.
And that can thrive at 11 kilometers.
Yeah, it's impressive. It'd be about the same if you were to lie down on the road. It'd be about the same as setting the Empire State Building on your chest. So, mind you,
it's ridiculous.
That's the kind of pressure, but the pressure exerts all around you, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Except for your lungs, you wouldn't really feel it on your body. But
so you went to Royal Roads and you started working with the Navy.
The Navy, yeah. And so I was a combat systems engineer for the Navy, which is primarily the weapon systems and the sensor systems on the ships. And then, but I this is embarrassing to admit to, but
this is the place to
we love it. Yeah. So As an oceanographer and a guy in the Navy, I got seasick really bad. So of the 3 years that I spent at sea, I was sick every single day.
Oh,
But I was functional, right? I just carried a bag around with me and
Functional, but just smelt bad.
Yeah, so I'd have this bag, and every 10 minutes or so, I would just turn and and I was in a meeting with the executive officer of the destroyer that I was on one day. And there was 4 of us in this tiny little cabin for an hour and a half with me throwing up every 10 minutes. And at the end of the meeting, he goes, "Mr. Dakin, commend your tenacity, but the rest of us can't handle you anymore. Really? As soon as we get to shore, you're off my ship and you're never getting back on." So I had to go to the Navy or the Air Force.
Yeah.
And so I still did anti-submarine warfare and sensor design there, but yeah, much more comfortable environment.
So was there a specific project that you did while in the armed forces that you cherish the most, or you remember being?
I think the best place that I worked at, well, I mean, they were all good. I love the Navy, I love the Air Force. They were all good. But when I was in Ottawa, I was working at a place called DMAIN.
Yeah.
I'm the director of maritime aircraft engineering and maintenance, and I was working in the research and development section there, developing new sensors for finding submarines. And so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that must have been.
Everything was top secret, and your state of the art stuff. It was a lot of fun. So
I remember you tell me a story that you were looking for a submarine and then it disappeared, and then
And then you had a movie named after it.
oh yeah.
Manuel was telling me the story prior to you.
Yeah. Well, no, we had a submarine that we were this is back during the Cold War, just to set the stage. But so there's a submarine that left Vladivostok in Russia and disappeared, and you're supposed to know where the ballistic missile submarines are every day, so that if a war ever broke out, you could take them up. And this submarine disappeared, and we knew where he was supposed to go. Well, there was some intelligence on that, and sure enough, 2 weeks later, he showed up right where he was supposed to go, but we had no idea how he got there.
How you got there, yeah.
And so it turns out that after the Cold War ended, and the scientists started getting together from both sides, and we found out that the Russians were a good 10 years ahead of us in oceanography.
Wow.
So the American submarines were better, but the Russian knowledge of oceanography was better, and so they knew how to use the seamounts and how to use the ocean fronts in the ocean where all the currents collide in order to sneak by unheard.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was interesting endeavor.
How long was that stretch that they were?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks,
So
yeah.
in distance, what?
Well,
what would that be?
right from Russia until he got on station off of California.
Wow. Was there any points throughout that trip that he appeared?
No.
Or it was just completely
gone,
disappeared for 2 weeks?
Yeah, he was gone.
Wow.
That must have been scary.
Oh, there was people were upset. Like, where is this guy? But
Yeah.
So, why did you leave the armed forces? In order to, how did you get into Ocean Air West Canada?
well, I left at the end of my contract. So after the end of my contract, my wife wanted to move out here. My wife of the time.
Yeah.
And so I came out here and built a house out here, and then started working for AML Oceanographic, which was fabulous. So I ran the research and development section there. Mm-hmm. Designed, I think it was adding up all of the new products and product improvements. There's about 34, I think, different designs that the team that I was working with worked on. And it was a small team. It was Greg Eaton, myself, Terry Ridings, and Brent Cerna. And so it was a small team. We did some awesome stuff. It was really fun.
So for 15 years you did this?
17, yeah.
17 years. Yeah. Oh, wow. Then from there, you jumped into Ocean Air West Canada.
Yeah. So I've been there for 8 years now. And Yeah, it's been cool too. The stuff that we're doing there is, this is going to sound corny, but
We like corny.
We love corny.
Yeah.
This podcast is to be
Yeah,
corny.
look at us.
yeah, so I feel like I'm making a difference in the world working where I'm working. And so to go back to an earlier comment we were talking about before we started this, is that you get up in the morning and you go, man, I got to get to work. Yeah, because
you can't wait to be
there. The stuff is so cool that we're doing. It's just phenomenal, and it has a big impact on our coast here in BC and to the world in general. So it's phenomenal.
That's awesome, because he just answered the question that we always ask our guests: is what is your why for doing things and your reasoning for your actions?
Yeah.
Right, and you feel like you're changing the world, and you're making this a better place for the next generation, so on.
Exactly,
and so on. And when we were talking with Paul and Nairn at Zero Waste Emporium, they had a term where you brought up the term about how right now we're just borrowing the earth from the next generation.
The next generation, yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
And what kind of projects? We'll start diving into the projects that you're working with Ocean Networks Canada, because when I worked with you for the little project that I did, it was incredible.
That was an important project, to be honest. And I actually use the report that you guys generated, and I use it in presentations, and I teach engineers using the results from it. So well done, you guys.
Thank you.
Right on, Eddie.
Yeah.
And so your main focus is working with hydrophone sensors?
It is now, yeah. For the first 7 years, it was all sensors and new product development. But now I'm focusing entirely on the Underwater Acoustics Program, which is mostly the passive acoustics, but the active acoustics as well. So
and what is a hydrophone for those?
A hydrophone is just an underwater microphone, but it has to withstand a lot of pressure, so the design is radically different than what a normal microphone is.
Yeah.
But it does the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So you do all this work under the title SimRes, correct?
No.
That's
separate. So this is Ocean Networks Canada, where I work. But we have a partner with a group called SimRes. It's the Saturna Island Marine Research and Education Society. And they're based off of Saturna Island, which is just in the Gulf Islands here. It's the the easternmost of the southern Gulf Islands. Mm-hmm. And they have put in a couple of hydrophones as well. So I've been helping them with the installation of that and running of it and data analysis and things like that.
And the environment around Saturna Island, is this a very important environment?
It's for the Salish Sea, which is where we live. Saturna is one of, or the boundary passage where Saturna is one of the more important areas in the Salish Sea, because it's where most of the it's a choke point, and so it's where most of the mixing happens with the water as it rushes from the Pacific Ocean around into the Strait of Georgia, where Vancouver is. And there's this little tiny choke point, and there's a sill, which is basically just like a mountain ridge. But it doesn't actually come up above the water, but it chokes off the amount of water, and so the water, as it rushes in to fill up the Strait of Georgia on a flood tide, and then rushes out on the ebb tide, it has to pour over this sill, and it churns up, and it mixes all the nutrients and the oxygen from the surface down to the bottom.
So life will thrive in that location naturally.
So it generates a lot of the conditions necessary for life in the. It would be a different environment in there if we didn't have that mixing going on.
So at the same time, it's mixing all this stuff up to attract animals. Is it a highly traveled place for vessels?
Yeah, well, it's a choke point not just for the water, right? It's a choke point for the animals. It's a choke point for the vessels. And it's not just the recreational boats and like the sailboats and the sport fishermen and stuff. It's all also the commercial fleet and the tugboats and not too many of the tugboats, but there are some. And then there's the big cargo vessels that go into the Port of Vancouver.
All the time.
Yeah, and there's 3,000 vessels alone that go in every year that go in and out of the Port of Vancouver. And then there's the Port of Nanaimo, and there's lots of other vessels going on up there as well. So it's a busy place. And I think Transport Canada said the last time I was talking to them that there's about 100,000 small vessels in the Salish Sea. So not all of them are at sea all the time, whether it's 1% of them are at sea on any given day.
That's still a lot.
How big is the region of the Salish Sea?
Well, it basically includes the Strait of Georgia, Boundary Pass, Harrow Strait, and Strait of Juan de Fuca. So, and Puget Sound.
Yeah.
So surrounding the tip
All
of the island.
the southern
so
end of Vancouver Island. Yeah. It's a fairly big area, but it's busy. It's probably the busiest shipping area in North America, I would think.
Yeah. So with all this traffic of animals and being a choke point for vessels, and it is a concern. Is it a concern with regards to the health of marine life?
Oh, certainly. I mean, whenever you get animals and vessels in close proximity, there's the risk that somebody's going to get run over.
Yeah. Does that happen a lot?
Not a lot, but it does happen. So a couple of years ago, we lost one of the southern resident killer whales, the endangered population here. So it was struck by a vessel and killed. So it does happen, and there was a fin whale a little while ago, and it's not. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and it's generally when you get this wall of steel coming at an animal, you have
nowhere to go.
Yeah. Well, most times the orca will know a vessel's there, and they'll get out of the way. But if it's a high-speed boat, like a pleasure boat that's up on plane or something, the whale's not going to be able to detect that as well. So, but if it's a big container ship, the orcas generally don't have too much of a problem with that.
Sorry, Tom, but what is the overall well-being status of the wildlife, marine wildlife in this area?
In this area,
good, bad, getting better? Is there a point where it's both?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you look at the humpbacks, the humpbacks were threatened a few years ago under the Species at Risk Act, but they've been downgraded to species of special concern, which is great. The humpbacks are a success story, and so you're seeing more and more humpbacks around. So my last 8 trips to Saturna Island, 4 of those trips I saw humpback whales.
Nice.
And so it's really, really nice. The downside of that is that there's a lot more humpbacks to get hit in this busy shipping area, right? If they're farther up the coast where there's less vessels, then that's a wonderful thing. In this area, it starts to increase the risk. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the southern resident killer whales, and they're an endangered species under the Species at Risk Act. There's 75 with the birth of the new calf this year. There's 75 of those animals. And that's a pretty small population. So losing one, like we did with that male to the boat a couple of years ago, that's a big kick in the teeth for that population. And then we lost J50 died just this past year, and J35 lost her calf as well.
I heard about that.
Yeah, that was a sad story.
So what happened with that?
So she had a calf just off Victoria, and it only survived for less than an hour. And then she went into mourning, and she carried this calf on her forehead for 17 days.
What?
Wow.
Yeah.
She carried her calf.
Yeah.
Why did the calf die?
I don't
Just
know, because
natural
the calf was never recovered to do a necropsy on.
Yeah.
So, we don't know that.
That must have been a massive amount of energy that she spent.
Well, yeah, because she went over 1,000 kilometers with that calf. So carrying, that's calves are big animals
Yeah.
too. Right? And so that was a concern, was what's her health going to be like after all this expenditure of effort to keep that calf on the surface. But she turned out to be, came through it well.
And that just shows you how compact these families are and how grieving takes part.
Yeah, and the whole pod grieved too, right?
Yeah.
So it was quite a phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Besides humpback and orcas, are there other kinds of whales in this region?
Lots, yeah. So let's say there's gray whales come through, generally not into the Strait of Georgia, but it's not unheard of. But so they migrate up and down each year. They have the longest migration of any animal on the planet. And then there's different types of orca. We have several types here, and then there's the humpback whales, fin whales. Offshore, there's blue whales and sperm whale. We actually had a sperm whale circumnavigate the Vancouver Island just a little while ago.
Really?
Just last year.
Yeah, that was in your report. That's what my next question was.
Yeah, that was astounding.
Was it rare? Why is it?
Yeah,
why is it
it
rare?
hasn't been seen for like 30 years.
Due to
Well, it's just not an area that is that conducive for sperm whales. They're typically deep ocean animals.
Yeah,
So
okay.
They'll dive down a kilometer and to find squid and fish. And so being in a shallow sea like this is quite unusual. And their echolocation that they use, there's a huge amount of energy in that. And when Yucasam, which is the name of the whale, came through, when he echolocated for each click, you could hear the reverberation off the rock walls in the channel. So when he was up in Johnstone Strait in particular. And it would it'd be like a gunshot, and then there's just this reverberation for a long
powerful.
time, of echoes everywhere.
Yeah.
So, like, it must have been weird for that animal.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
exactly. Hearing the echo coming back.
Yeah.
And so, with regards to your in Satona Island, right, the choke point of this life and these vessels and stuff like that. So, how do you know this traffic of vessels? How can you track this traffic of vessels and animals? I know animals you use hydrophones, right?
Yeah. And we can do that with vessels too. So if you have multiple hydrophones, there's something called a short baseline array, which is a couple of hydrophones spaced a little bit apart, like a meter or so apart. Mm-hmm. And because the speed of sound, which is about 1,500 meters a second in seawater, it's slow enough that you can measure the time difference of that sound going from one hydrophone to the next hydrophone a meter away. And that will tell you the angle of the direction of that incoming sound. And so we can actually track calling animals or vessels moving around based just on the acoustics. Just like you can hear with your ears that as a bird flies by or a motorcycle goes by, you can tell the direction but with your 2 ears. Same thing with the hydrophones. Another way of doing it is with a long baseline array where you have these hydrophones separated by many kilometers, and you measure the time difference between the arrival times, and then you can plot a position in between those hydrophones. So that's one way. Another way is by radar, and another way is by photography. So you take time-lapse pictures and you can track a vessel's movement through the pictures. And then lastly, there's the AIS system, which is the automated identification of ships.
Yeah. And every ship needs one of these too.
Yeah, any large vessel will carry one of these radios that says, "This is who I am." Every few seconds while they're underway, it transmits and says, "This is who I am. This is what kind of vessel I am. This is where I'm going. This is my speed. This is my heading." There's a whole bunch of information that we pick off of that.
And how many hydrophones are underwater around this area?
Whoa, lots. Yeah, so
in the Salish Sea, how many?
So Ocean Networks Canada has it varies. So we just took out the underwater listening station, which was 4 hydrophones, but we've got one at the mouth of the Fraser River, so that's one. Second one at Strait of Georgia Central, another one at Strait of Georgia East Node. SimRes has 2 hydrophones, one at East Point, one at Monarch Head. The Whale Museum off San Juan Island, they have a hydrophone there. There's another one at Port Townsend, another one at the Seattle Aquarium, another one at Nia Bay. So that's the sort of NGOs. And then we've got a whole bunch offshore on the west coast of the island as well, and up the BC coast. But then Department of Fisheries and Oceans has a whole whack of hydrophones in there too.
Something like 28 or something.
Well, that's just for one project. So Paul Cottrell, he's the Marine Mammal Rescue Manager for Canada, I guess. But so he does all the marine mammal rescues out here. But he put in a tracking system of 28 hydrophones around the Salish Sea.
Yeah.
And but there's other researchers like Harold Yerk and Svein Vagel that have hydrophones around as well. And Transport Canada will be putting in a pair of underwater listening stations in partnership with JASCO and ONC, just in Boundary Passage to measure vessels going into the Strait of Georgia.
Do hydrophones vary in size and function, or are they all the same?
No, they're not all the same. So there's inexpensive ones that you can buy for your kayak and throw over the side, and they tend to be a little noisier and not quite as robust in terms of longevity. And then there's some really expensive ones, and I would say of the 4 best hydrophone systems in the world, commercial ones, 2 of those companies are Canadian, which is kind of cool.
That's pretty cool.
So there's JASCO Applied Sciences and with their AMR, and there's Ocean Sonics with their IC Listens, and then there's a French company called RTSys and a Spanish company called SMID. And so those are the sort of the top end systems.
So you have all this data from AIS, from your hydrophones, from cameras that are located in the islands. What do you do with this data? How do you use this data? What are you trying to nail down with all this data?
Yeah, so there's a lot of uses for it, but when you say all this data, just to put it into perspective, so there's a number of non-governmental organizations up and down the coast. So if you start at the top end, there's the North Coast Cetacean Society, and also Cetacea Lab up there, and NCCS has, I think, about 11 hydrophones up there, and then halfway down the BC coast is Pacific Wild, and they've got another 5 hydrophones in the water.
Yeah.
And then in Johnston Strait, there's Orca Lab, and they have 6 hydrophones in the water. And then there's Ocean Networks Canada, and we have about 20 hydrophones in the water. And SimRes, the Saturn Island Marine Research and Education Society, they have 2 hydrophones. And then Orca Sound, they have about 5, I think. So there's a lot of hydrophones up and down, and that doesn't include all the government hydrophones, right?
Yeah.
The DFO and Transport Canada. And so just those the NGOs alone, we're collecting about 1/3 of a petabyte of data a year.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so
and megabyte, gigabyte, terabyte, petabyte.
That's right. So about 300 terabytes a year. Is what we're collecting
of underwater noise data.
Yeah, and I would imagine that DFO is collecting even more. Maybe upwards of a half a petabyte or so. And so, if you think about it, that's a lot of data, and there's not enough acousticians on the planet just to analyze BCs.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one of our problems in this field, is that we need more acousticians, but B, we really need automated tools to run through and find all of the pertinent stuff in this data. Like, here's a whale detection. This is the type of whale it is, so that when we have a researcher that wants to work on humpback whales, for example,
Yeah.
and they'll say, okay, well, give me all of the humpback files that contain or all of the acoustic files that contain humpback data
Yeah.
along the BC coast. We could do that. Right now, we can't. But we're working towards that, and over the next 3 or 4 years, I'm hoping we'll have that capability. And then all of a sudden, now you can start saying, well, here we have calls all the way up and down the coast. Are these animals? How mobile are these animals? Can we start to identify individuals just from their sounds? Like with humans, we can easily identify each other from our voices, right?
Yeah.
Can the whales do that, and can we do that for the whales? Right. So there's lots of things that we need to work on still, just to figure out who's doing what where. If you look at the North Coast Cetacean Society, Janie Ray up there, there's close to 500 resident humpback whales up in her neck of the woods around Gillout. And she knows them all. Like,
By name.
yeah. In fact, in some of my presentations, I have a picture that I took of a humpback fluke, and it turns out that humpback is called Potter. And since I'm a Harry Potter fan, he goes into all my presentations. But and I would not know that if it wasn't for Janie, right? And she's got all books and posters and stuff that show all this
So
stuff.
she's a researcher like you as well.
Yeah, way better than me. She's,
She knows 500 whale
Yeah, I
names.
couldn't identify a whale to save my life.
So by identifying these whales, and with using hydrophones, you know exactly where they are, and the main goal is to protect them, to do research with them, to...
Yeah, well, if you look at, the southern resident killer whales are the most studied population of whales on Earth, right?
Really?
And we don't know where they are most of the time. And so, I mean, it's astounding. Like at night they disappear, and they move so fast that every day you have to go and where are they?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why DFO has put in this big whale tracking network, is so that if there's a problem, that they can go out and figure out where these whales are, right? So, for example, if one of the tankers had an oil spill, and if the whale surfaced within that oil spill, that would be a disaster. So. So one of Paul Cottrell's requirements is to get out there and keep these whales away from that oil spill.
Just like herding them?
Yeah. So he's got techniques to use his boats to move those whales away from the oil spill. I don't know how it works. You'd have to ask Paul, but to do that, he needs to know where those whales are. So that's why he's put in all these hydrophones to try. Now, luckily for the southern residents, they're really chatty. They're always making noise, and as opposed to the big killer whales, which the transient killer whales, they hunt by sneaking up on the sea lions and the marine mammals that they eat. So they're quiet, and so they're like the little stealth fighters of the killer whale world.
So you wouldn't be able to locate them as easily as the southern residents.
I mean, they do make noise, especially after a kill or when they're socializing in larger groups, but normally they're really, really quiet, and they would be hard to detect. But the southern residents they're screaming their heads off all the time.
What's the biggest threat from noise pollution for marine wildlife?
Just the magnitude of the noise, really. So if you think about it,
That's a good question.
It is a good question, because sound is really important, and it's really important to most animals on the planet, right?
For communication.
Yes, but for communication, for finding mates,
Right.
for finding food, for listening for danger. There's all kinds of reasons that you use sound, and all vertebrates can hear. Not all vertebrate species can see, but all vertebrate species can hear. And so sound is important above water and below water. But underwater, it's even more important because light doesn't penetrate very far underwater, right? So you can't see very far.
So most mammals don't use their eyes, huh?
Well, they do, but it's not their primary sense. Like for us, eyesight is our primary sense.
Right.
Yeah.
But for marine animals, the majority of marine animals, it's not their primary sense. It's acoustics. That's their primary sense. So for a blue whale, they're out at sea and they're kilometers away from anything, and they need to find one another to socialize, to mate. So how do they communicate? They do it through sound, and they can communicate over incredibly long distances. The first tracking of a blue whale by Chris Clark using the old military SOSUS arrays after the Cold War ended. He was tracking a blue whale off the coast of the UK, and he was doing it from Virginia.
Holy shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's astounding. And so these animals can communicate between each other using something called the deep sound channel, and that allows them to communicate over ocean basin-wide distances.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow,
That's
yeah.
across the Atlantic right there.
Yeah, or the Pacific.
Or the Pacific, yeah.
Yeah.
So all the noise out there is just
Yeah, you figure
killing
there's
the
like
communication, maybe.
90,000 large cargo vessels plying the world's oceans, and so they all generate a lot of noise. These vessels will have 150,000 horsepower engines on
Yeah.
them. You're pushing this massive thing through the water, and water's heavy, right? You got to push it out of the way.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of energy to do that. So these vessels are pretty noisy, and so there was a couple studies done a few years ago that showed that the acoustic energy in the ocean due to shipping was doubling the amount of acoustic energy in the water every decade. So up by 3 decibels every decade.
yeah.
And that's rolled off a little bit. It's still increasing, but it's not quite doubling in the last decade.
So what we're just talking about now, is that related to the Ocean Noise Health Index project?
Sort of, yeah. So
And what is that?
what I'm trying to do is generate a map of the nation, or starting off with the Salish Sea and BC coast,
Yeah.
and figure out what the sound exposure levels are to the animals in the marine environment. And so what I want to do is put together a whole set of indicators on maps for every shipping lane that's in there, and every hydrophone site that we have on the coast,
Yeah.
and generate a metric that will show you how noisy it is at any given time. So we can create this map, and that will allow our government, the federal government, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Transport Canada, and all the First Nations who are trying to steward all of these marine areas. So it would just give them a tool to say, this is how bad it's, and they'll be able to track it over time to see if it's getting worse or if it's getting better.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you put in a mitigation measurement, then you'll be able to see, is it having an effect or not, right? And we know that the sound has a bad impact on both fish and marine mammals, and also on invertebrates too. So rockfish, the population can go into decline if it's too noisy in the area, and certainly the southern resident killer whales are struggling to find food because it's just too noisy to do echolocation.
Yeah.
When to put it in perspective. If you're an orca is the southern resident killer whales are trying to find the swim bladder of a Chinook salmon, which is about the size of your thumb, at 100 meters or so, maybe 200 meters at the most, and they're trying to get an echo off of that swim bladder the size of your thumb at 200 meters.
So they're trying to listen
Right.
For the echo.
to the echo of a size of a thumb.
Yeah. So it's a very faint signal coming back, and so if there's a lot of noise on that in the
channel,
area, you
yeah.
just
Yeah.
you won't be able to hear that faint little echo coming back.
So can you expand on? Let's move to the orcas now, because you're very passionate about it. So you already told us there's 75 here in the southern.
The southern residents,
Southern
there's
residents.
There's also we also have the Biggs orca, which
Yeah.
is a marine mammal-eating orca,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the offshore orca that are in the area as well. So,
Yeah.
And northern residents even come down. If you go up island a bit, you can see them as well.
And the offshore workers, what's their primary diet?
Fish and shark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fish and
A lot
shark,
of shark.
really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's so many shark that the rough skin of the shark actually grinds down their teeth. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so the southern population, they're most they eat off bigger fishes like Chinook.
Chinook, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about it, you've got a 5-ton male, you've got a 5-ton animal doing a high-speed chase after this fish. That expends a lot of energy, so they need to eat about 400 kilograms of fish a day, and the fattier it is, the more energy it is. So big Chinook is the best because you're getting the most bang for your buck after one of these high-speed chases.
Yeah. And I remember somewhere I was reading that the population of Chinook was decreasing.
Yeah, so the Chinook are in trouble here. And,
Due to us, right?
Yes, right.
Why?
So we've
Overfishing.
that's part of it, but but there's a lot of other impacts. Probably the most important impact on the Chinook is the way we've managed our rivers and creeks. So we've destroyed the salmon's ability to spawn, right? And so we've really reduced the population as a result of that.
Is that just a high volume of people in the area?
Yeah, if you dam a
traveling,
river and then all of a sudden it becomes impassable to those fish, right?
So a lot of dams
or
in the area.
you put in culverts and you concrete over areas, and it makes it a lot harder for those fish to spawn. Or if you dredge out areas to make it deeper for shipping, then
there's a high flow of water, right? Would wash away the eggs. Is that a threat
in the
as well,
shallows,
too?
yeah, but they need shallow water to spawn, and so if you dredge out an area and you take all the sand and the rocks and stuff away, then all of a sudden it's not a habitable place for those eggs anymore. So we've really damaged the rivers all the way up and down the coast from California all the way up to Alaska. So that is a huge impact. And then there's our fishing has certainly had an impact on it as well, and it's not just the commercial fishery, it's the recreation, everything has an impact on it.
Yeah.
And then you look at other sources of impact, like the crap that we throw into the ocean.
All
too.
the plastic.
And the contaminants,
pollution.
the PCBs and stuff. So there's lots and lots of different impacts.
Are there actions that we're trying to take or implement to change this?
Yes.
And
So,
what are those?
The cool thing is that NOAA in the States and Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada and Transport Canada, they're all working really hard right now to try and save the southern resident killer whale in particular. But also on the other coast, the North Atlantic right whale and the St. Lawrence estuary beluga. But so there's a lot of work being done by the government right now to try and put in immediate mitigation stuff. That what can we do really quickly, like moving shipping lanes to take the noise away from feeding areas, maybe putting in sanctuaries, reducing shipping noise by slowing vessels down.
Okay, I see.
And there's all kinds of things that they're trying to do in the short term, and then there's all kinds of mitigation measures that they can try and do in the long term, like changing ship hull designs and having vessels mandated to be quieter. And so there's lots of technologies, especially developed by the navies, to make their vessels really, really quiet. The warships are the quietest vessels out there. So if we can take that technology and move it to the commercial fleet, then we could make everything a lot quieter.
And you mentioned the just the vessel still moving through the water creating noise, but that's not the main source of noise.
Right.
So what is the main source of noise from vessels?
The main source of noise is the propulsion system.
The propulsion system, yeah.
So you've got these massive big engines in them, and if they're connected to the hull, bolted directly to the hull, it's like having this big steel drum. And all the piston firing in the diesel engines just couples into water, and it's really loud. And you can mitigate that by taking the engine platforms and mounting them on rubber shock absorbers and things.
Yeah.
But even so, there's something that's even worse, and that comes from the propeller, and that's called cavitation. And cavitation is as you move the propeller blade at an angle through the water, it acts like a wing, right? And so one side pushes against the water and generates the thrust to move the vessel through the water. And on the opposite side of that blade, on what on a wing would be the top side, that water has to rush in and fill that gap, because as the blade pushes the other water away, more water has to rush in behind the blade and fill that in. So it creates a low pressure area. And if that low pressure area gets low enough in pressure, i.e. below the vapor pressure of the water will boil. And so you'll generate bubbles, and these bubbles are filled with steam. And once those bubbles get pushed back into a high pressure area, there's nothing to support them anymore because they were generated by low pressure.
Yeah.
When they're in a high pressure area, those bubbles implode, and they implode like a miniature explosion. And so you have millions and millions of these bubbles coming off the propeller, and it's just this
ridiculous amount of noise.
Yeah, it's just a massive amount of
It's like
of
little
noise.
detonation bombs.
Exactly, and they're really broadband too. So it covers the low frequencies, it covers the high frequencies. So some animals use low frequencies to do their business, like the blue whales and the fin whales and humpbacks. And other animals use really high frequencies, like the porpoise and dolphin, for echolocating. And these bubble implosions, they obliterate the whole spectrum.
Does cavitation heat up our oceans as well?
Well,
Because you said that it's heat, right?
not heat. It's not steam. So it's the pressure that causes the bubble. But by the same token, you're expending energy when you create these things, and then they implode. So that you create the bubble. It expands in size, full of steam, and then when it implodes, there's definitely a heat there because everything's rushing in together and really high pressures.
Yeah.
And just from adiabatic processes, you generate a lot of heat there. And so, yes, technically you're right. There's heat generated there, but it's not a massive amount. Like localized, it can be very intense, but
Not enough to be detrimental.
Not to heat up the oceans or anything.
No.
Okay.
So I encourage everyone out there to take a look, just Google cavitation and take a look at how intense and how powerful it is and how it affects the actual propeller blades. Like these are little detonations, and it corrodes and it erodes on the actual material of the propeller blade. So just that puts into perspective the amount of energy that is behind these bubbles, and that's what creates noise underwater. That's one of the main sources that creates noise underwater. And whales and all these animals are listening to these explosions happening all the time.
Yeah, it's just a constant din. But it's not the only thing, too. You figure of all those vessels that are out there plying the waters, and it's just even the little tiny boats that are out there just fishing, they all have fish finders and echo sounders on them, right?
Oh, yeah, too.
And the majority of the echo sounders are running at about 50 kilohertz. And the orca need 50 kilohertz band to find their salmon.
Really?
So the fish finders work really well at finding the salmon, but that's the same band that the orcas need, right? And so you have several thousand recreational boats out there all pinging away at the same frequencies that these animals need to do to find their food. It means there's very few Chinook out there, but it means that with all the noise, it's even harder to find the ones that are there.
Yeah.
How powerful is the ping that orcas emit?
Let's take it back a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about echolocation and how orcas hunt.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So to run through the whole sequence. So in the head of the orca, in the nasal passages, they have just the same as us. We have vocal cords, but they have a part of their nasal passages has the ability to produce a click, and it's just like snapping your fingers, right?
Yeah.
And that click goes out in all, that energy from that click goes out in all directions, right? But the whale's head has something on the front called a melon. And that gives this distinctive shape to the orca's head. And it focuses a lot of that energy out the front. So it's coming out like a flashlight beam, a narrow beam, about anywhere from 13 to 20 degrees. And so what the whale's doing is it's taking the energy that it creates and then focusing it out in one direction. And so when the whale's fishing, you'll see it sweeping its head back and forth, generally pointing down a little bit and sweeping its head back and forth. To try and find these fish. And as that sound goes out from the whale, it's only got a finite amount of energy, right? And as it goes out and the flashlight beam gets wider and wider and wider, and that energy is dispersed over a wider and wider area. And so you have these losses called transmission loss. And when it gets to the fish, most of that energy just goes right through the fish because the fish is kind of the same as water. But the air bladder, the swim bladder that's in the fish is a really good reflector.
Which is the size of a thumb.
That's right. And you were listening. So that re-radiates the energy really well. But it radiates it in all directions, not just straight back to the whale. So only a tiny amount of this very tiny amount of energy that got there actually goes back in the direction of the whale. And then that expands out more and more as it goes back to the whale. And then the whale picks that sound up by its jawbones. And so the jawbones are sort of big flat blades in the water, and they pick up these vibrations really well, and they're well connected to the ear, the inner ear of the animal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How far does that click reach? You said 100 meters.
Yeah, it depends on how.
Is there a max?
Yes, certainly. I ran some quick calculations on it, and you should be able to pick up in really quiet conditions. You should be able to pick up a salmon at about 200 meters.
Nice.
But if it gets noisy, that'll drop down really quick.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the issue that we're talking about.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
So all this noise is just preventing the noise from the fish to get back to the sound.
Right. And it's not just echolocation. They're calls too, because these animals call back and forth to coordinate their hunts.
Yeah.
And they call back and forth to keep their family groups together because they can't see very far underwater. Right. They can spy hop and stick their eyes above the water and see distances, but underwater they can't see very far, so they use calls back and forth to know where everybody is and who's who.
Yeah.
So, sorry, what's a bigger threat, the sound pollution for the hunt, say in regards to hunting fish? Is the sound pollution or humans' actual physical effect on overfishing?
It's humans.
It's
So right now the biggest impact is the lack of Chinook, which is our fault.
Okay.
And there's other external factors as well. The warm water blob that was out there a couple of years ago.
Right.
It changes the temperature of the water, changes the feeding patterns of all the animals, and the Chinook were struggling those years. But the primary impact is us. Right, and so we're really the culprits, and we're the culprits for the Chinook. We're for the lack of prey. We're the culprits for the noise. We're the culprits for the toxins that are in these animals. So it all boils down to us.
So we need to do something and be proactive.
Yes.
And I just want to. So you mentioned the whales communicate between each other.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there's 3 pods of the southern residence.
In the southern residence, there's 3. Yeah, J,
So
K,
you
and L.
can target these 3 pods by their noise and that they make.
Tell them apart, you mean? Yes. Yeah.
And we'll play you a clip right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you have that one or?
Yeah, I do. So there's. All of this stuff came from orcasound.net.
Yeah.
And and you can just go to that website, orcasound.net, and they have tutorials of which this is part of, and they've done just a beautiful job. But here's a couple of things that will allow you to tell the different pods apart. So J-pod makes a sound like yee-haw, and sounds like this. So that was J-pod. So if you hear a yee-haw, that's that's J. And then K-pod makes a sound like a mewing kitten, but they all make that sound. But K-pod will make multiple mews, and so it sounds like this.
Doesn't have that fluctuation in tone. It just one steady
it's a
tone.
mew, but for the K-pod, it's mew mew. Right?
Yeah.
Is what you're looking for there. So if you hear single mews, it could be anybody, but if you hear multiple mews, then probably K-pod. And then L-pod makes a sound like hey look, and it sounds like this.
So the hydrophones are actively picking these noises up so they can locate, oh, this is J-pod, this is
That's
K-pod.
right, yeah.
This is, oh.
Yeah. Well, I'm not very good at this, but Kristen Keynes, who works with me at Ocean Networks Canada, she's really good at it.
Yeah.
And so I will defer to her in all those.
Yeah. And so they're using these calls to locate their family and to coordinate.
Keep everybody together, coordinate their hunts.
Coordinate their hunts and mates, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So.
And these are all matriarchal pods, right? So the mother is everything in it, and these animals don't leave their mother throughout their whole life. Yeah. Yeah.
Same as us, Brody.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there, geographically speaking, is there a certain area where you would more commonly find each pod?
Yep. So they all use the Salish Sea, but some pods go a little bit farther north, and they have been known. Some of the southern residents have been known to go all the way up as far as the south end of Haida Gwaii, and another pod goes all the way down to California.
Oh, wow.
So and they can boogie.
They're fast.
Yeah, like Granny, who was over 100. And she could make the trip from California back up to the Salish Sea and really quick. So obviously she was in pretty good shape.
Well, they move all the time.
Well, that's true.
Exactly,
They can really mow when they want to. They're fast.
Yeah. So we were talking about the noise that the ships make and vessels. And I just. They're calling us.
Speaking of,
They're calling us.
Yeah.
So, which one is the noisiest
Of the ships?
of the ships? Yeah.
The noisiest one that I have ever recorded was a container ship.
Yeah.
And so that was running about 201 decibels, which is really loud.
That's super loud.
Yeah.
What? Can you explain decibel?
So decibel scale is a logarithmic scale, but what it means is that every time you go up by 10 dB, you're going up by 10 times the amount of energy. So if you go from 160 dB up to 170, that's 10 times the energy. 170 to 180 is 10 times the energy. So if you go from 160 to 180, that's 100 times the energy.
wow.
So if you look at the quietest vessels that we've measured are the warships, and so they're clocking in at about 161 or so dB, and the noisiest ones, on average, the noisiest ones are running at about 190. So that's 1,000 times more power, acoustic power, coming out of one vessel compared to from the quietest vessel to the noisiest vessel, and then. That's just to the average of the noisiest classes, right? So if you go up to the loudest vessels, so there's the tankers and the bulkers and the container ships, the very loudest of them are clocking in over 200 dB. So that's about 10,000 times the energy. So it would take 10,000 of the quietest ships to equal one of the very noisiest ships.
That's a lot of noise.
Right.
And, then
And so that's why it makes it-
3,000 ships coming in and out of just the port of Vancouver.
Yeah, but they're
a
not
year.
all noisy, right?
Oh,
You have to
right,
keep in
right.
perspective. So it's just the very noisiest ones that are that loud.
So that's what the federal government, I feel like the future, the best possible future would be for us to put a limit on, hey, your ship is too noisy, man. You have to take it out of the water, change the propeller,
buy
a new boat. Buy a new
in
boat.
critical habitat, we should be limiting the amount of noise you can make. So if you're going to come into an area that's considered critical habitat, then yes, you should be quiet.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But yeah, I think you're right, and that's probably the way of the future.
Are we trying to do that?
Yes, in some ways. So one of the things that the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Vancouver has been leading the world in their efforts to quiet the vessels that are going into their jurisdiction, and it's the ECHO program that they run. And it's actually been quite phenomenal. So they were the ones that Transport Canada and the Port of Vancouver funded us, JASCO and ONC, to put in an underwater listening station in the Strait of Georgia. And so we measured over 2.5 years, we measured 5,000 vessels to the near international standards for vessel measurements. And so we now have a list of all kinds of different classes of vessels and how much noise they make, and for particular vessels, who's really noisy and who's not. So the next step in this would be to say, well, what the port would like to do is create an incentive program to incentivize quieter ships to use the critical habitat of the Salish Sea. But there's other things that we can do too, in that if we can identify specific ships that have, let's say a particular vessel has there's lots of rope in the ocean, right? You drive over it, it gets wrapped around your propeller shaft on these big ships. As that propeller shaft turns, that rope gets tighter and tighter, wound on that propeller shaft, and then it starts to squeak, and then it starts to squeal, and it goes with the shaft,
Creating even more noise.
Yes, and it can be really loud,
Yeah.
right? And so we can detect that with the acoustics, and we can identify that with the acoustics. In fact, there's an amazing amount of stuff you can identify with the acoustics.
Yeah.
You can tell what type of engines on the ship, whether it's a gas turbine or a diesel engine. You can tell how many cylinders are in the diesel engine. You can tell what the cylinder firing rate is. You can tell how many shafts the vessel has. You can tell how many blades are on each propeller of the vessel.
It's very powerful.
Just through hydrophones.
Yeah, just from listening.
Wow.
And you can tell in the reduction gearboxes. I just did an outboard looking at the acoustic spectrum of an outboard off of Atena Island just a couple days ago, and you could see that there was a 2-to-1 ratio in the reduction gearbox on that outboard motor, and you could tell that there was 22 teeth on the reduction gearbox on the gear that's connected to the propeller.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's
And you could
ridiculous.
tell from the Doppler shift of the sound, you could tell that particular boat was traveling at 23.5 knots. And you could tell from the duration of the Doppler shift, you could tell that it was 120 meters away from the hydrophone when it went past.
Yeah.
Just from sound.
Yeah.
So
And we're not very good at this, right? You look at a sperm whale, and a sperm whale, they have the largest brain on the planet, right?
Yeah.
And the orca the second largest, and the human the third. But they're really good at underwater acoustics, and because they do all their hunting down a kilometer below the surface, and where it's pitch black, they can't see, and so they hunt everything by echolocation. And these animals can tell the difference between a long line fishing boat and a recreational boat and a seiner, and they'll make a beeline for a long line fishing boat from 10 kilometers away.
Really?
Because they know that there's a whole bunch of tuna hanging off the end of that, and they can just go pluck them up. And it's dinner time, right?
Smart. Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Noise is so powerful, and I've never actually put put my head down and thought about it until I did the project with you, and I was
Yeah.
like, wow, this is amazing. And there's so many engineers that are interested in more in ocean.
Good. More the better.
Yeah, the more the better. The more people you can get, the better, right? So how far can these vessels propagate this noise? Like, how is there a certain, like, kilometer wise?
They're ping, right? That's
Well, the
most-
sonar is another whole nother issue, right?
Yeah.
That can go quite a long ways. But the vessel noise itself, it depends on where you are. So if you're in the Strait of Georgia and you're a really noisy vessel and you've got a deep propeller,
Yeah.
you'll insonify the whole Strait of Georgia. We can hear that vessel 65 kilometers away, no problem. In fact, on the hydrophones at ONC that we have in the Strait of Georgia, there is never a time when you cannot hear ships.
Really?
It's just always there. Sometimes it's very quiet, like especially on Christmas Day and stuff, but there's always still a vessel that you can hear. But if you're out in the open ocean, it radiates out spherically away, so a 20 log R is the range. That's how it falls off.
Yeah.
And so you can hear them kilometers away easily, right? And but if you look at sound that gets caught in the deep sound channel, especially for submarines, because they typically operate deep, you can hear them a long, long way away if they're cavitating. So, for example, we heard one south of Alaska, and we picked it up on hydrophones in Australia.
Holy shit!
Really?
Yeah. So, but he was cavitating. He was full speed ahead.
And he was
hadn't
just
missed.
giving her.
But
Yeah.
that's
So
I don't know how many kilometers that, but that's
don't know.
thousands of kilometers
Yeah.
away. Holy.
yeah, it's impressive. And if the worst place for a vessel for creating noise into the deep sound channel for a surface ship is when you're going over the continental slope. So you come off the continental shelf and over the continental slope and into the abyssal water. But the sound will reflect off that continental slope into the deep sound channel, and then it'll go for a long, long.
That makes sense.
long.
As you come over it like this,
That's
it'll
right.
shoot down and shoot that
Exactly.
way.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think about it that way as well. There's so many.
Yeah.
Ranges on the
Yeah,
water.
exactly.
Yeah, they can reflect from each other and
Yeah, it goes a long
magnify.
way.
And so, just to point to our perspective, this phenomenon of it's called masking, right?
Yeah.
So that the ship is actually masking the call that the orcas make to each other in order to mate, to hunt, to feed. And we have a clip here, and you can find this clip too in the website that you said.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a clip so you can play it. Or we don't really have this particular set of clips on our hydrophone highlights page, but
I'll put
it's
it up in the episode.
Okay,
Yeah.
it probably something we should put on our
Yeah.
hydrophone page. But let me just quickly find this here. So this this is the sound on a hydrophone that's 2 kilometers away from a container ship, and there's a whale about 1 kilometer away, so halfway between the ship and the hydrophone.
Yeah.
So you should be able to hear the whale. So the trick here is to listen to this and A, try and hear the whale over the ship noise, and B, figure out, because I've played this sound already, so tell me what species this is.
JK or Alpine?
Right, or humpbacks, or yeah. Anyway, so here's the first sound of the container ship and the whale.
Well, that's
I heard-
impossible.
I think I heard one mew. Is it a K?
Nope.
No.
Nope. It
Holy,
was-
I can't even hear it. You can't even hear it.
yeah,
No,
it's
you
hard.
can't. You
It's-
can't.
There, some of the younger kids that I've played this to can pick it out.
Really?
Yeah. And-
Right, because
and
their frequency changed with age.
that's right. Yeah.
Their ability to hear frequencies.
That's right. Yeah. So when you get older like me, then yeah, my hearing
Can
tops
you
out.
hear it?
No, I couldn't hear that. But but I know it's there from the spectrograms. And so if you filter it, I cheat. Yeah. Kristen can hear it easily, but I can't. But so here, if you filter out all of the ship noise, this is what it sounds like.
Hey, look.
Hey, look.
Hey, look,
right,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was a J.
That was L.
Or sorry, no, that was a
K. KJLMNO.
Because K is mu.
Hey, look. Right.
Hey, look.
Yeah. So J-pod. So that was J-pod. Hey, look. Okay. So I got another one.
I thought L was hey, look. Yeah, wasn't it P or Yahoo with J?
You're asking a physicist to do a biologist's job here.
Hey, look, it's L-pod.
Is it L-pod? Okay.
Yeah, it's
there you
L-pod.
go.
Lucky guess.
Yeah. Well done. You're better at this than me.
Well,
You should become an acoustician.
no, I was just. You know what? I was just listening to you speak.
Yeah. Good. All right. So I'll play another one here. This one's a little easier.
I hear it.
Yeah.
It's
exactly.
the K.
Nope. That was a humpback whale.
Oh, was
just-
it?
Right.
I thought it was here.
So that was the same thing, though. It was a passenger
loud
vessel
music.
this
Yeah.
time, though.
Okay.
There was a passenger vessel?
Yeah,
Man, that's noisy.
like a big cruise ship. Yeah.
And this is from 2 kilometers away.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the whales is
The whale's
one
kilometer away. Yeah, so similar geometry. It's because we're measuring the same shipping lane.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is I couldn't filter it out quite as much this one, but here, this is what it sounds like with some of it filtered out.
You heard that? I couldn't hear that.
No.
Yeah.
I thought I was hearing something else.
No. Well, that was more of kind of like a low frequency.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The hump that was a moan, right? So it's
So what frequency in decibels or decibel level do the orca whales operate? And
well,
humpback
one of the
whales?
papers I read was 200 decibels for the source level of an orca click.
Yeah.
But they can control it.
Yeah, they can control.
It's the same as a person talking. Some people are really loud. Some people are not so loud, right?
yeah, Brody's pretty loud.
Yeah, pretty loud.
And if it's noisy in the area, they'll yell louder, right? And they'll click
Yeah.
louder. And
Exactly. We have just the final questions. So you told us your why, right? Which
It's our
is
favorite question.
Our favorite question. We
We touched on it
answered that one.
at the beginning, and his answer is you want to make the world a better place.
right?
And how do you? What do you recommend for people listening to this to make a change? What can they do to make a change with regards to this issue?
For this issue, I would. Well, when I thought you were asking, I was in the world. I would just say the best way to make a change for everybody is find what you're passionate about, something that can have an impact, and then go do it because you'll enjoy it more, right? But
Totally.
for this particular issue, if you're a boater, turn off your echo sounder when you don't need it.
Yeah.
And if you see whales, don't go running over to them. Stay as far away as you can.
What's the physical restriction?
Right now,
What
the
distance?
limit is 200 meters.
Okay.
So it was 100 meters last year, and it's changed to 200 meters. And I'm kind of hoping that it'll go farther than that,
Yeah.
to 400 meters.
Right? You told me this.
Yeah,
earlier.
US does 400
US
meters,
is-
isn't it?
Well, they're looking at it.
Okay.
So I think, they've adopted 400 on the front and back, and 300 on the sides, I think, or something.
Yeah.
That's the proposal. I can't remember, but yeah, I'm hoping that Canada will go to 400 meters as well.
So if you're a boater,
For the
turn off the
southern
echo sounder. Don't get close to
Yeah.
whales if you see
And if
them.
the whales do turn towards you and get closer, then throttle down, take the engine out of gear, and that way you're even if you have the engine on, you're not radiating a whole lot of energy into the water, and so it becomes quieter for them.
Yeah.
So.
So you're obviously not a pro whale watching.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Look, there's a good thing for whale watching, and there's bad things for whale watching. It's like most stuff, right? There's good and bad for everything. So the good thing about whale watching is it gets people connected to the whales, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The cool thing out here is that we have an endangered species, the southern resident killer whales, but we also have other species that are not so dire straits, like the humpbacks and the transient killer whales, the big whales. So if you're going to go whale watching, hopefully you watch the transients. They look the same as southern residents, right? And go see the humpbacks because they're phenomenal too. So yeah, go. That's great. But my take would be steer clear of the southern residents because we've done them enough damage, and we can easily tip them over the edge by doing things that make their life even harder.
And I know people still actively go out and search for them every day.
Yes, but luckily, the whale watching fleet's actually pretty good about this, right?
Yeah.
So they're 90% of what they look at in terms of the orca are transients. So they're doing a pretty good job already.
Awesome.
You know, so. And they're working with Transport Canada and DFO to try and do a better job too.
Yeah.
So,
What I would do is I would say, okay, if you're a whale watching company, you need this certain type of engine, you need this certain type of prop, and I will say if you don't have the quietest equipment out there, don't do it.
yeah, I would take it a little more general than that, and I would say. Let's certify that if you're a whale watching boat, that you have a couple of advantages here. One is you generally have a naturalist on board, somebody that knows the whales and can identify them. And so you say, okay, this is a southern resident, we won't go visit him. We'll go over to a transient whale or a big swell. So that's one thing. So, and the second thing is if they regulate their approach speed and out to a certain distance. But then another thing you can do is not regulate the specific type of technology, but say this is how loud you can be. So if you recall, well, you're probably too young to recall this, but the aircraft industry, it was really loud, and people were complaining all the time. It was these planes are too loud, right?
Yeah.
And so they took it in steps, and they reduced the allowable noise that these planes could make over, so they'd be running for a few years at one, and then they'd drop it again. And so the aircraft industry developed better technologies, better engines. They went from jet or turbojets to turbofans, which were much quieter, and they reduced their signature. And we could do the same thing on the marine side as well. So instead of specifying a single type of engine like a jet drive or an Arneson drive or something like that, if you just say, okay, if you want to go within 400 meters of the whale, you cannot emit more than this level. And then we can certify the vessels that are going to go do that. We could certify those vessels so you measure them, you run them over one of our sound ranges and measure them and say, yeah, your vessel's capable of going to 400 meters, or your vessel's capable of going to 300 meters, or whatever.
That doesn't happen now?
No.
Like going over ranges, making sure that these vessels are...
No, it doesn't.
Huh.
But it's something that could be done.
Yeah. I feel like that's a great idea.
Setting restrictions.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Just one more question. If there's anyone out there listening and they're so motivated to get involved,
How do we get involved? Or
how do they get involved?
I would say if you're really interested in the whales, take a look at orcasound.net to learn about the calls and things. And if you want to learn about the southern residents and other as well, take a look at the Whale Museum and the Cetacean Research Center. And you can learn a lot from those organizations. Also go to the Port of Vancouver Echo program, because they've got some really cool tips that you can do while you're out boating, and they've got a guide for how to operate your boat in around whales and things like that. So Yeah.
And if anybody has a question for you, where can we find you?
So you can contact me through Ocean Networks Canada. So my email is tdakin, so TDAKIN at oceannetworks.ca.
Well, can we add that in the show notes?
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
fine.
We'll add it in the show notes.
And I would say, if you can muck around on our acoustic highlights page.
On Ocean Networks Canada.
Yeah. There's all kinds. Dosits is another. DOSITS is a really good resource for acoustics if you're so inclined.
Cool. Nice. And do you have any questions for us?
So, yes.
Before I really need to go to that. Questions. Okay, awesome.
Okay, yeah. So questions for you guys. So, first of all, why are you doing this, and what do you hope to get out of this?
It's a very good question. So Manuel approached me with this idea of starting a podcast maybe about a month ago.
Yeah.
And he said, Brody, I want to do something that's positive. I want to, see what I get. So I want to do something that's positive. I want to impact people. I want to change and share people to make us better and make our community better. And as well as he wants to have kids, right? So I want to make my kids' life as smoothly as possible. So to answer that question, I believe is the reason why we're doing this is to affect our community and our listeners in a positive way by feeding them knowledge that we think is very interesting and that could change us humans for the better.
Awesome. Very noble.
Yeah. It was a deep. I like that question because that was the main question that we ask ourselves is why do we do things? What is our reasoning for our actions? And we reflected on this a lot, and we just want to change the people. And Manuel said, I want to change the world.
I think that is inspiring other people and inspiring
young
change
people, inspire young people, our generation,
and change for the good is so humbling, and I feel so much joy by doing so. Mm-hmm. And I experienced this a little when I started the UVic Summer Racing Club, like introducing all of these students to a different field. And they come into me and say, wow, this is actually really interesting. I want to get in this field. It made me feel some sort of way.
Yeah.
And now that I am in the field, I keep finding myself trying to do something for other people. And this is a project that we partake that can help other people gain knowledge from a wide variety of people. Mm-hmm. And
another
to inspire
reason,
change.
Another reason is that we get to do something with our closest friend that's positive.
Right.
That's not going out and
a lot to be said for that too.
Yeah. So hopefully people who are listening take good tips from this podcast and apply it to their everyday life. And I feel like podcasts are good because you can just listen to them, mm-hmm. and you can take what really interests you, and then you can flush whatever doesn't interest you.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And another reason for having such a broad platform is for that reasons to attract a whole bunch of different listeners, because if we were super specific with just one idea or subject, we would only attract one certain kind of listener. But we're trying to, what Manny said, we're trying to have people to take what they want to, what they like, and then try to implement it.
Right.
And this will eventually guide us to our future. Like Brody, the other podcast with the physiotherapist, he had an epiphany that he loves this field and he might want to study it.
Mm-hmm. And I think
for me, I didn't convert either one of you to acoustics. I failed miserably.
I mean, I will keep...
he's the mechanical engineer.
I'll keep pushing it, and I might take this to Mexico, you know?
Perfect.
Going back and...
Which leads me to my next question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, this is a tough question because life happens and gets in the way. But how long do you think you're going to keep doing these things?
For as long as we can.
Yeah.
So both of us we like to take pride in our word and make our word impeccable. And we promise each other we're going to do this and just as far until we can't. And there hasn't been any reasoning so far for us to stop.
Like right now, it's like we have 5 episodes already recorded and edited.
No. Yeah, we have 5 episodes
You've
released.
only been at it a month?
Yeah,
Yeah, only
we have 8 after you. We now have 8.
And then on top of that 8, we have 3 that are just sitting there waiting to be released every Tuesday. So we're actually running out of time. We have more episodes than we have time.
Right. And we have people scheduled in. We have someone scheduled in for May.
Wow.
All the way up to May. So we're very excited. Cool. And we'll keep doing it. And I love talking to people. And I love meeting new people. And I love making that connection. And hopefully in the future, reconnect and see where we are, or if we're interested in a field, reconnecting with that person and get immersed into that field.
Yeah.
Or people say, hey, can I connect with Tom Dakin? Yeah, go
exactly.
for it.
Directing people that reach out to us that are interested.
So hopefully you reach out to a couple of people.
Oh, so it sounds like this isn't a problem for you because you got all kinds of things lined up. But if you run out of ideas, let me know, because there's lots of other cool scientists around that
Definitely
could fill in on other subject matters.
Well, that's funny because Manny was talking to me today. He said, Brody, reach out to your friend. We need to keep this thing rolling. So I reached out to him. We got someone committed today to do another episode. So you should hand over those names or get us in contact, because the more knowledgeable and people that are inspired and have awesome whys and reasonings for their doing, the better. And we want to talk to those people and share those people that not necessarily have the public platform that certain people have just because of their job, right? And we want to share those people, right?
we want to change the world.
Yeah, we want to change the world, Tom.
I applaud the effort.
Well, thank you,
And the
Tom.
passion.
Thank you a lot. And you're a very passionate person, and I'm very happy and I'm very fortunate. We're very fortunate that you came and you agreed to talk to
it was
us.
fun.
I learned
Share
lots
knowledge.
because I had no knowledge on this prior to Manuel introducing it to me.
So you're going to give up physiotherapy and become an acoustician?
Well, if you hire me. I'll send over my resume. I'll put it in the show notes.
Do you work for Herring? Like
Harry? Oh, no. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And contact us. Contact Tom Dakin. You can find us in iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and adventuringforknowledge.com. And thank you to our editor, our videos, Trainer Peters. And see you next time. Have a beautiful day.
See you guys.
An adventure in nature.
Never stop adventuring for knowledge.
And please remember to be active in your community. Brody, come on. Keep going.
Remember to smile.
Remember to be kind and respect yourself, others, animals, and a beautiful planet.
And please, never stop adventuring for knowledge.
Until next time.
Peace.